extraordinaire, obviously. I couldn't imagine who to interview after Damien Eccles, and I finally found you. So it's I think it's nothing wrong with going from someone with probably the largest presence in the occult world, so large it's bleeding into the popular world, right? He's a mainstream figure who's also an occultist, which is not something we've had for a very long time. I think you'd agree. But we're just going to talk about the tarot. That's the idea, yeah?
Yeah, pretty much.
Let's talk about the tarot. So what's your story?
Well,
how'd you get into it and all that?
Well, I had an existential crisis basically a few years ago. Dropped out of university, moved back to my home, and then my mum had some angel cards. So I was reading the angel cards for a few months. I was reading them every day. And I started using spreads with the angel cards. I actually used Celtic cross spread with the angel cards. And then I picked up a deck of tarot, and within a few months I started selling readings professionally. I was getting into Hermeticism basically after my existential crisis as well. So I've been studying Hermeticism and stuff since that time, since I started tarot basically.
Are you a fan of the famous meditations on the tarot then?
No, I haven't really read any tarot books. I got into it through social media, YouTube, like the kind of new age tarot community, really, like very new agey.
Yeah. Well, that was definitely my experience. I think I was 10, and it was the 90s, right? So it was really becoming popular, and yeah, my mom got me a deck for Christmas of the Egyptian tarot. Yeah, and when I was 12, I couldn't get I did babysitting, but I couldn't get a job because I was a bit too goth looking, like they just weren't hiring a chubby, long black haired kid to work at Starbucks back then, or anything like that. People would tell, like Subway, they would tell me straight up, like, we wouldn't ever hire someone who looks like you. They were very blunt about it. And so I started doing tarot readings myself. I found that I think people thought it was sort of adorable that someone that young was doing it, and that's why they humored me. Occasionally were shocked when I gave them the bill. What's your favorite deck? And tell me more about jumping into it and starting giving readings and all that.
I use the Rider-Waite now, but I really liked the Lon-Milo Duquette's Tarot of Ceremonial Magic for a while. That's a 1999 deck. It went out of print last year, but you can still get it from Etsy.
It went out of print a long time ago. Yeah.
No, I got it like 2 years ago from US Games website. It went out of print last year.
So originally it went out of print a long time ago. So 5 years ago, you couldn't get it. I saw a copy at my buddy's house. They were selling for hundreds of dollars, and then they re-released them, and they're for sale now. Like I just got one just a few months ago.
So they must keep putting it back into print then every few years.
Yeah, I thought they'd only put it back into print once, but maybe it's been put back into print more than once. Yeah, it's a really cool deck, and obviously the fact that he took the time to make it himself and put his own experience and insights into it, I think makes it really special.
Yeah, I mean, I don't use it anymore because some of the symbolism is a little bit kind of I don't know. I don't really use that kind of symbolism anymore. I'm gonna be making my own deck, but I need to hire an artist. I don't have the money, so.
Yeah. I mean, that's That's probably the reason a lot of us don't make our own decks, is just the cost to work with an artist is no small thing. But there's a lot of websites out there apparently now where you can just make your own deck relatively easily. So that's exciting.
Yeah, because I find the symbolism is a good, if you're concentrating on it, it's a good way of getting into spiritual states or whatever. So I don't find the kind of Thalemic theme to be so conducive to spiritual states. It's more like astral level, and it works, but
Did you accidentally press your dog barking sound effect button?
oh yeah, that's my dog. Yeah, I think my parents are home, so I'll be back in 1 second.
Right. We're back.
Okay, so yeah, I prefer kind of non-thalamic symbolism these days. So
Yeah, Thalemic, the Thalemic reversal of the star and what's it called? The Emperor? No, it's the Emperor. Yeah, it's Emperor, right? Hey, or damn, I don't even know this Thalemic symbolism, but yeah, it doesn't work for me either. I imagine it is only meant to work for Thelemites.
yeah, so yeah, I just use the right weight these days, and it still has plenty of deep symbolism. Josephine McCarthy did her research and then published a book like mid 2020 called Tarot Skills for 21st Century, right? I don't know if you've seen that.
Yeah, I'm aware of it.
Yeah, so she went to like the primary sources or whatever, and from the British Museum, and found a load of symbolism from it and gave some of it in the book. So that was pretty interesting.
Yeah. More work does need to be done to the Rider Waite, especially with the new revelation that it was drawn from the Welsh Grail myth and much more influenced by Yeats than Waite.
Yeah, you'll know more about that than me. I don't know.
I'm very curious what the primary sources Josephine McCarthy might be drawing from. It might be a book I have to read at some point. I find her works hit or miss for me, though I can imagine that it's good for a lot of people.
Yeah.
How do you feel like, for example, I don't like what rubbed me the wrong way really was on a Glitch Bottle interview, she scoffed at the idea that you should let someone else ever handle your tarot cards. Whereas there's a lot of tarot teachers and masters who will have you get the person you're doing a reading for to shuffle the deck. And she says it's absurd to ever let someone shuffle your deck or touch your cards at all. And my problem with that is that it's not just that she thinks her way is the better way to do it, but she's convinced that other ways are wrong. And for me, I always find that a problematic quality in a teacher. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, handling the tarot deck. Yeah, McCarthy is very kind of earth magic, she's very earthy in everything she does. She's very astral in everything she does. So, when she's
Are
describing
there any
how
other options than earthy or astral in this sort of context?
there's spiritual.
Okay, fair enough. Good,
Yeah, so well, let's say
good save.
she's in, oh, it's been a long time since I did the Kabbalistic worlds, but like Yasod. So she's in what would it be? I'm slow, so I can't remember what world Yasod is, but um
It's in
um
Yetzirah.
yeah, Yetzirah, right? But I would, whenever I'm trying to read tarot, I'm trying to get into Bria,
Right.
right? Because Bria is basically where I've managed to get up to. I don't think I've ever been to actually, right? So just about
Yeah.
sometimes you can get into Bria and it's a very, well, I don't know what you consider, I don't know what you would consider the criteria for getting into Bria to be, but what I consider Bria the start of the spiritual realms, right? And it's a very different experience to the astral and stuff. So
Yeah.
McCarthy's very astral. So when she's describing how stuff works, what I noticed is that she describes basically the effects of what's happening. She describes the phenomena rather than the causes of what's happening. So when she gives her instructions, it's very practical, but it's practical based on the phenomena. So it kind of, it's like, I'm trying to think of an example. Basically, if you only get taught something by looking at the phenomena, you can come to certain misunderstandings of how stuff works because you don't have the actual causes behind the effects, if that makes sense. So, like you shouldn't let someone handle your own cards. I'm getting to the answer, right?
Oh yeah, no, I'm following you.
So you shouldn't let someone handle your own cards. If you have the willpower and the control over the astral, and you have control over what you're seeing on the astral, right? If you rise above so that you have control, because the subtle rules are dense, then you're basically it doesn't matter whether someone touches your cards because you have control over it. You have the willpower, you have the authority kind of thing. So I always try to rise above onto the spiritual if I can, in order to attempt at least to have authority so that you can control the experience and everything. So I'm very kind of firm. So, I wouldn't let the cards have any kind of personality. I wouldn't be creating any kind of thought form or anything. I'm very kind of usual willpower, rise above, and then control the experience kind of thing.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think that's a very fair analysis, and you explain that would be an adequate explanation for the quandary I brought up about what she said. I can the apologetics are sound. It's a good explanation. I could, if that's, I don't know if that's what she thinks, but your explanation of what might be her reasoning is reasonable. Yeah. I've been reading her book on healing. It's right over here. What's it called? Magical healing. Magical healing. Yeah. Um, you know, I read a lot of authors that I have different views from, because you're still going to find amazing stuff often in any experienced person or adepts writing. Like the insights are, whatever their theoretical framework is, there's usually some good pearls in there, no matter what, that you will get insight from or inspiration from, or just simply agree with. Who've you been reading these days?
These days, I basically have a spiritual teacher, so I'm basically just concentrating on that stuff, not really, not that much other stuff. I'm trying to fine tune my own kind of theories and kind of take what I've been reading over the past few years, because I read a lot of books over the past few years. So
I think a lot of us did during lockdown. Especially if you didn't have a computer that could play video games, then books were about all you could do other than get radicalized online, probably.
yeah, so um trying to flesh that stuff out. But yeah, I read McCarthy's book pretty recently. I read Backdoor into Hermetics, which is based off Franz Barden's system, right, by Mark Rasmus. He does a similar thing to McCarthy, where he talks about the phenomena and the effects and stuff. So, and you can also see where he's on the astral levels, because he's like, he won't go near nature magic because of how it kind of affects the synchronicity that comes into his life or whatever, right? It's kind of it shows you it gives you an idea into the kind of system that he's using, I guess. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, of course. He's got there's the new Franz Barden book out of Prague that's just been released, beautiful little hardcover, right? That I don't know if you're aware of. Look forward to checking it out. Yeah, apparently some of his, lost little writings, his pseudepigrapha or something, have been translated and are being put out in this beautiful little limited edition hardcover from the people at Czech Hermetics. So that'll be interesting to have some additional Franz Barden writings. They were such a huge part of my teenage years, just like, I carry, even when I went on a 7-day camping trip with my high school class, I had Initiation to Hermetics, my little purple hardcover, just right there in my 80-pound backpack, because I just didn't want to be without it, because I was really working through his steps and seeing if I could eventually, create fire in my hand, which I don't know about you, but years later, I think that maybe that was one of his fantasies rather than gnosis.
What, to be able to create fire?
Yeah, I don't think that's physically possible.
I mean, there are definitely things which a lot of occultists consider impossible that I've seen personally, or that I've heard from reliable people that can happen. I'm not sure about creating fire in your hand.
I know, right?
Maybe if you had like a piece of
feels like
paper,
a bit of a stretch.
If you had a piece of paper in your hand, you could set it on fire.
So people have claimed, and there's the videos of the guys in India apparently doing pyrokinesis, but then you find out that there's these chemical compounds they conceal in the bag, and there's a way to fake that, even though, and make it look real. It's I was talking about this issue with my buddy Matt, shout out to Matt, the other day, and in the context of Autobiography of a Yogi by Paramahansa Yogananda. And that was a book I also got when I was a kid, but just couldn't get into it. I just didn't interest me for some reason. But there's a lot of sort of miracles or wonder workings in that, apparently. I'm just checking out the audiobook now, and what my thoughts are on this. This is a really interesting thing to talk about with you and with literally anyone who's into this stuff, in my opinion. Like, it's a topic that almost anyone can give their thoughts on, and their thoughts are interesting because there is no actual knowledge about it. We don't have any scientific evidence. It's not like we have the first bit of proof and it's now being debated about how it's possible. We don't have the first bit of proof. We have, just anecdotal accounts and witnessed accounts and all of that sort of stuff. It's very much in the same realm as a lot of UFO stuff used to be before the government was like, yeah, something's up there. And we're like looking, everyone apparently is like, filming them, like, no shit, right? If it's not us, who is it? But with those sort of extreme forms of manifested psychism, from, telekinesis to pyrokinesis, my thinking is we gotta, if we like, believing that something's possible that we haven't proven is possible is really a healthy thing, because that way people will then pursue the limits of our knowledge to see if it's possible. And if it is possible, it can be proven. And then we can go from there. but a lot of these things have not yet hit that initial barrier of proven. You know what I mean? Like proven is in the sense that the data is not argued or debated by anyone, by
Yeah,
quote
well,
unquote anyone.
I mean, yeah, I mean, parapsychology.
Yeah,
Well,
it's a great example of this sort of liminal field.
yeah, well, a lot of parapsychologists, well, when I was looking into parapsychology, a lot of them believe that they take as an assumption that consciousness is in the brain and that it's, physical or material, and they're basically materialists, right? But they're parapsychologists, and you know, they they were talking about the issues with designing the experiments. Like, you're trying to see whether you can alter the output of randomness in a computer, right? Computer generated randomness. And it's called micro PK, right? Which would be micro psychokinesis. And you're basically trying to alter the probability generated by computers, right? And if it's statistically significant, then technically you can infer it. And, so they set this up in a laboratory, and their experiment was botched because because there was a motorway like a mile away, and the vibrations from the lorries on the motorway were affecting the results of the experiment because of how they had it set up. So they couldn't even design a proper experiment to test the micro PK.
Yeah. Do you think most of parapsychologists are materialists to act as a buffer against criticism, or do you think they're really actually materialists and they're just confounded and want to have answers to the questions raised by the data they're working from?
I mean, I think with a lot of people in parapsychology, they see the spiritual, this well really the occult stuff, all the psychic phenomena and everything, as basically something that can be a tool for science, something that can simply be taken, and you take all of the idea of its sacredness out of it, and you just strip it down to how it works mechanically, and you basically would just be using it as a tool, right? And this is even in within the people who believe in, who are spiritual, right? When they're in the parapsychological community, they tend to, they go into the archives, and you know the archives, which are hard to access. They do their research basically so that they can get this knowledge, so that they can teach remote viewing or whatever to people, because it's like a tool to them. It's like there's no sacredness in the world, really.
Yeah. Yeah, the remote viewing thing's a interesting one that keeps coming up, especially the issue of whether governments are still employing it, which they most likely are, it seems.
Mm.
you know and that's a strange thing, because they wouldn't use it and invest resources in it unless it was useful, right? The government never wastes money.
Yeah, and Yuri Geller,
I can't keep a straight face when I say that.
Yuri Geller was hired for intelligence work, and a lot of occultists are also were in intelligence work. Crowley was in intelligence work, and Gerald Gardner, um, as a thing against, to play on the superstition of the German occultists in the Second World War. Right. Do you know about that?
Oh yes, the gentleman spies. I mean, yeah, the governments basically were like, hey, it's harder for us to travel to these countries and gather information, whereas you're just a a dandy with a lot more money than sense, or whatever. So, or you have social status, or you're just a gentleman, right? That's the idea. You're just a gentleman. You can go there, move in those circles, and let us know if you hear anything. You know, sort of employing your civilian population to gather information. I mean, it's definitely not a new trick, I think, and it's definitely an interesting topic. How much people like Crowley and them were interacting with the government. I don't know how much of the details on that we have, though. Obviously, I think it's Tobias Churton that has a in-depth study.
Yeah, so back to tarot. Do you want to say anything else about tarot?
No, well, sure. Yeah. We can move back to tarot. I'm here to hear about your sort of journey and your thoughts on the practice. Let's talk about what you're planning on doing. So you had a you had some content out, but you've decided you want to make it better. So you're going regrouping and working on a website. And what's your plan for that? I'm sure there's a lot of other people who are at similar stages in their development and practice to you out there, and asking themselves the same questions that you're asking yourself. So I think that'd be interesting for people to hear.
Yeah, well, ultimately, I told you I came into tarot through new agey kind of stuff, social media. Um, that there's been an attempt to force tarot readers and astrologers and that kind of all the esoteric consultants, let's say, to they've been forced to put disclaimers saying entertainment purposes only, and you're technically not allowed legally to answer certain questions like pregnancy and health and missing persons and that kind of thing. But a lot of people ignore this, and there's basically no awareness of the fact that you can't ask these questions or they can't be answered. And people are setting themselves up as spiritual authorities, even though they have their disclaimer, as entertainment purposes only. And there's a lot of contradiction, and I basically think that we really need regulation in the spiritual community, which I know people are going to go crazy. I'm probably going to be hated, but I honestly think that it's ridiculous the amount of harm that's being done. There are channels with 500,000 subscribers blatantly using Barnum statements and just marketing psychology, and people, most people see it as entertainment, but there is a small section of the population who, because this is like a method acting, right? It's like a method acting, like they're not admitting that it's nonsense. It's like there's a small group of vulnerable people who are sucked into this stuff, and the algorithm feeds them synchronicity and so on, and it causes a lot of harm. So
Law of attraction stuff.
yeah, so all of these kind of, if you take the law of attraction and you kind of tweak some of the ideas, then you get what magic actually works as. But if you take the law of attraction as talked about in The Secret, or by all of these self-appointed new ages on YouTube, right, you're not getting how it actually works. You're getting a kind of toxic metaphysical solipsism or other like harmful ideas, which really need to be, I think they need to be held accountable in some way, in a way that obviously still allows for freedom of expression and everything else. But in the meantime, before we get to regulation issues, I'm trying to basically train some people in tarot in a way that is basically teaching them to be able to control their experience on the astral, so that they're not sucked into egregores and energetic currents and patterns, that you can easily kind of be drawn into. Basically teach people to get rid of the superstition that exists in tarot, because there's loads of superstition still.
Yeah, well, superstition is a major problem for most of us in this sphere. And yeah, there's always going to be some people that are just, incredulous and sucked into the silly side of all of this. And I don't know. I don't think regulation's ever going to happen, and I don't necessarily think it's going to. Even if it did, it would be a good thing. Regulation, I mean, just look at how our governments are treating us. Like, I'm here in Canada, we still got people in jail for peaceful protesting, legit peaceful protesting, just because the government doesn't like what they were saying. So regulation and authoritarianism, and it's a tricky one for spirituality. I mean, you really do sort of want people to go in. We can do a lot more to teach people what to look for sure. But if you're talking about someone's base ability to, what's the phrase? How do you say it? Because you're talking about a vulnerable minority of the population that's susceptible, as you said, right? And it's hard to, we want to speak about these lovely folks in a fair way, but some onus has to be on people themselves for what they get into, what they believe. Like, when I was young, I tended to believe everything the New Age told me, because it was so popular, and it was something I was getting through family, and my entire environment was sort of wrapped up in it. And it was impossible at that time, it seemed, to differentiate between what was true and what was not true. It was because the tendency was to believe it all. And if you didn't believe it all, then you couldn't believe any one thing. The idea of that one thing would be truer than another was very problematic in the 90s New Age, because who are you to say, right? But that's a thing. It's still a thing. And training and professionalism can do good by training people and making them better at what they do, and freeing them from superstitious ways of thinking and being overly incredulous. But it can also put artificial barriers in constraints on it's hard. It's a tricky one, man. It's a really tricky one. I mean, you just see especially since the occult already so frequently attracts people who are looking for just, titles and ego stroking and all of that solipsism, as you said. It's already highly enticing for people who, haven't done that well with everybody else. They can go into this subgenre of spiritual culture and become an archmage in a couple of years. I mean, there's the big drama going on right now about young occultists setting themselves up as gurus. That's all over Twitter, right? The whole Dot Darling, Georgina Rose catastrophe. And yeah, there's a problem when you're 2 years out of high school and setting yourself up as a guru, and trying to be a gatekeeper against everyone else, and using your massive platform to suppress all the educated and older people who have been out there doing things for a long time and have a lot to learn and to share and with the community. And to see the rise of youngsters who are using their followings on TikTok or Twitter to mob flag and attack um, older occultists is something that it's only recently coming to light, sort of, that this has been going on for a while, as the chickens have come home to roost, so to speak. It's a really tricky issue, man. The if people are going to be verified or get a stamp of approval in some way as a valid tarot reader or something like that. I mean, accreditation is one way of calling it, right? It's very tricky. I mean, you essentially have to then develop standards, and in this kind of, in spirituality, it's perhaps not possible to create any kind of universal standards. And when you're talking about the issue of psychism, I mean, astrologers barely have accreditation. They do. My mom was the head of the Vancouver Guild for a long time, and but most of her life she was never involved in those sort of groups with people, and that didn't really make much difference to her getting clients or anything, or getting recognized for her abilities. But when you go into tarot, which is a bit more intuitive than astrology is, I think we can all agree on that. um gauging intuitive and psychic readings from tarot is and what kind of things are said as valid and invalid is just, I don't know if it's possible. Like, how would you see it being actually possible to put what the kind of guardrails in the spiritual community that you're sort of proposing?
Well, when I say regulation, it's not quite accreditation.
Right. Yeah.
So regulation, my concern with the regulation is it being hijacked by technocrats, or by people who are into scientism, and trying to stop you, trying to turn it into a law that enforces logical positivism, right? You can't make any unverifiable statements, kind of thing. I can see it being hijacked like that. But regulation to basically, to put some kind of protections that are disclaimers, to force people to use disclaimers that are basically that actually are disclaimers, and you have to actually mean the disclaimer, right? Because if you say entertainment purposes only, that's the only disclaimer you need to have. And aside from that, it's like, if you have that disclaimer, as far as the tarot community is aware, for the most part, 99.9%, people don't know that they can sue you if you're doing things which are actually blatantly illegal. Like, people don't know that you can't ask health questions, that you can't ask pregnancy questions, that you can't do readings about missing persons. They don't know that. There's no awareness in the community. So I think the first thing is awareness. And then the second thing would be to form, some kind of tarot association which has actual standards, because I've been looking at the tarot associations, and there's the Tarot Association of the British Isles, and it's fair enough, but there's nothing wrong with it, really, except perhaps that it's only for the British Isles. And if you go on the forum, everyone's kind of walking on eggshells when they give you advice. Like, they're using the kind of softest language they can to kind of tell you to take responsibility, kind of thing. I don't know, like, I just found, I went on the forum, and the language was just very kind of it was just very just milk and toast. There's something about milk and toast language. Obviously, be sensitive in your language and tactful, but there's a way to be tactful, and then there's a way to kind of talk as if you're scared of telling someone the truth. kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah. So are you saying that you get the impression on the Tarot Association of the British Isles site that they're not speaking on the site the way they would speak in a real reading with the bluntness of a real reading, and they're just covering their asses?
I get the feeling that they're so concerned with, you know, kind of the luck of the kind of luck and the kind of status that comes with being seen as an altruistic person, if that makes sense. Like they give out free readings, right? And they're all volunteers, and none of the volunteers get paid, and that kind of thing, right? It's entirely voluntary thing, and so on. And you know,
Sorry
which
about the
is
sound outside. They must be cleaning the windows or something. I didn't know. Continue. Hopefully the listeners forgive us.
yeah. So you know, it's all voluntary, and it's very kind of the sort of brand for it is, you know, you join the association if you're very altruistic and willing to work for free usually, and all that kind of thing, which is not, it's not all tarot readers. Plenty of tarot readers are actually, you know, they would complain if you give out free readings a lot, because, and this was also shared on the Tabby forums, right? They actually don't like it when people undercut their prices, even though it's a spiritual service. And especially these days where everyone's come online, you know, some people would say you should never charge for a reading, right? They have that kind of attitude. You know, other people who are making a lot of money would say it's fine to charge for a reading, and then other people who, you know, maybe do it part-time or make a normal amount of money would say you should be charging a market price and you shouldn't be undercutting the prices, because it's a service, they're paying for your expertise, and you know, you're not charging a premium for the spiritual part of it. You're basically doing a consultation, right? You're doing like basically some mixture of life coaching or you know, general advice, or if you're a therapist, or if you have other kind of relevant training, whatever that is, you know, whatever kind of training it is, that's not quite clinical, then you're basically being paid for the consultancy. So you should be charging market prices. You shouldn't be giving too many free readings or undercutting the prices, which some people do. So the pricing issue is really a complex issue because of that, because some people would consider tarot to be sacred, and I would consider tarot to be part of, you know, the, you know, when you're reading the tarot, as far as I can work out, it's basically you're reading the astral light. So it's not sacred, because the astral light is not a sacred thing.
It's
And it's
not
not
sacred? The astral light?
no, the
How is it?
astral light full of
How is astral
illusion.
light not sacred? I'd say it's pretty sacred. Let's talk about this.
The astral light is the memory, you know, the world memory, you know, of the earth sphere, right? It's in Asia, right? It's in Asia. It's you know, it's the lower astral. I'm talking about the lower astral light, where you have like the you know, the collective fantasies, and, or I don't know if my understanding of it is making
Yeah,
sense to you.
I can see, like, Kabbalistically, everything on every part of the tree is sacred. Even the clipboard are sacred. There's nothing that is not sacred. Like Aleph is always Aleph. Keter is in Malkut as Malkut's in Keter. And so the astral light is the light of God in Hebrew, Ruach HaKodesh. It's you know, you could call it as part of the Holy Spirit in certain theologies. there's nothing to say that you can have as in your spiritual paradigm that the astral light ain't sacred. If that's part of your theology, that's your paradigm. You know, it wouldn't be mine, and it doesn't fit properly with Kabbalah at all. But Kabbalah also isn't a governing language of reality. It's a structural methodology for interpreting reality and nature and God. So there's definitely room for interpretation. That's for sure.
Sure. So, I mean, my understanding so far is that you would have the astral realm, which is not sacred, and then above that, you know, Kabbalistically starting in Bria, you have the higher astral, which still has form, but it's more kind of the spiritual realm, and that would probably be sacred, but and then you would have absolute, which is sacred, but I wouldn't consider Asya or Yetzirah to be really that sacred, because it's the physical plane which you're trying to get out of, you're trying to transcend, and then you have this psychic plane which interpenetrates the physical plane, which anyone can access regardless of their morals, regardless of their spiritual development. So because you can access it regardless of your spiritual development, and you can access it no matter who you are, just through, you know, certain practices which don't require you to have any connection to God, any connection to divinity. They just require you to, you know, have the natural perception, or to acquire the perception through exercises or through willpower or in visualization or whatever, and then you have it no matter who you are. So I don't consider that sacred basically because of that, because I consider sacred stuff to be what is close to a personal God.
Sure. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, it's not my school of thought on it, but these things change and develop as we learn. I think you might revise that when you look more into especially understanding of the four worlds in each of the Sephirah. Right? When you think of the fact that in each Sephirah, there's an entire tree in itself. You have each of the four worlds in every Sephirah. And so with that model of understanding, well, play with it yourself and see if it gives you any insights or whatever. That's what these structures are for, is to explore and put ourselves into a contemplative or practicing state within them, and then see what changes for us.
Yeah. Yeah,
I mean, think
I'll
about the
do that.
fact that the up and down thing, for example, that's again structurally heuristic and helps us gain different understandings, but then it doesn't play out in terms of Kabbalistic practice. For example, in the Hekalat literature and practices of going through the palaces or the halls, we're going down, we're descending. And if you see yourself as being in Malkut, in the kingdom, even though it includes physical and non-physical elements, just like the natural physical world does, more or less, then descending from there into the holy palaces, well, you're not going up at all, right? So you can see the directionality of the theory becomes really problematic when you look at those fundamental and oldest Hebrew practices, Kabbalistic practices of Merkava mysticism, of the chariot, descending down. See, the up and down thing just falls apart at that point. So it's interesting. I don't think we'll find an answer here, but that's one of the reasons that Kabbalah remains such an enticing series of variety of schools of thought and practice. And there's so many different Kabbalahs, in fact, right? You got many to pick from.
Yeah, and it's great. It's great to see your insights because you're really into the scholarly stuff. Um,
Well, I'm into the practice stuff too. So like, it wasn't just doing Hecalot practices and sort of Abalafian practices that led me to realize the significance of the descent, but even doing Enochian aether working and a lot of other spirit traveling practices, the sense of up and down, of ascending versus descending, starts to get turned around a bit and seem a little less straightforward. And that's what eventually led me away from emanationist thinking altogether. But again, we're each on our own journeys, and one of the great things and beautiful things about these spiritualities is how much we get when we explore new aspects of them. That's something people just, I think you might agree with me on this, whether you're practicing tarot or ceremonial magic or whatever your field of interests are, keep expanding them, keep pushing forward. Don't get locked into just one paradigm and one point of view and decide that it's the truth. And next thing you know, you're creating your own dogmatic church of you. You know, be extraterritorial in your investigations and say, hey, I don't agree with necessarily all the premises of this, but what if I suspend my certitude for a moment and enter into a state of openness and see what gets revealed, see if there's some new luminosity that can enlighten my assumptions.
yeah,
We're creatures of prejudice, eh?
yeah, definitely. Um, and yeah, I did practice kind of Golden Dawn stuff for a couple of years as well, but um, one of the things that made me stop was the issue of Enochian. Like what are the Enochian entities? I know it's a controversy.
No,
And
really, it's they're angels. They are what they are, and they always were angels.
I mean, I don't think they're angels, to be honest.
No, they're definitely angels. If they're not angels, then nothing that Dee was told was true, and the whole thing was a massive deception.
I mean, I think you have to consider that possibility quite seriously, because of how the system was um, how it was communicated.
Well, I would I'd say you're going to have an uphill battle if that's your argument, because how it was communicated was using the traditional practices that most of our magic's been communicated. So given that he was following on with the tradition of classical ceremonial magic, it's I think more likely he's a exemplary case of that technology being employed rather than a failure. And you definitely have to I mean, if that argument on its own basis doesn't hold water, the testimony of the long line of practitioners ever after testifying to, if nothing else, the power and effectiveness of that system of angelic magic, right? It's just one of the most
Sure.
one of the most popular and powerful tools ever after.
But I mean, if you were to get proper control over nature spirits, you'd be able to get the same phenomena, physical phenomena of creating rainstorms or whatever as you do with Enochian. So I don't see, I mean, unless you can give me an example of what an Enochian entity, supposed angel, can do that a nature spirit cannot do, I don't see why they're not just basically nature spirits, considering how they are so elemental.
Well, an angel could be a nature spirit.
I don't think so.
Oh yeah, yeah, categorically this is attested, like in the tradition.
Really?
Yeah, because angels are just spirits. All angels are spirits.
Yeah, but my understanding is that an angel is like theologically quite different to a spirit.
No, that's actually incorrect. Even in the crazy dogma of the Roman Catholic Church, that's not correct. The angels are spirits. They're just spirits, and an angel is usually given the title of angel when it's tasked with being a messenger of some sort and playing some sort of you know what's the word? Yeah, well, they're messengers. They're spirits with on a mission from God, and their missions are usually quite specific and tied to very specific things. So, for example, the only Enochian beings that you might say aren't quite angels are probably the cacodemons, who are some of the most simple spirits because they're formed of the least amount of Enochian letters and summoned by reversing the directions of other angelic spirits from the tablets. And you could argue maybe those aren't quite so angelic and a bit more chthonic, but all angels are spirits by definition, for sure. That's something that's never been even debated in the entirety of the Western occult tradition.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's actually it is a major paradigm shift when you realize that angels are just other spiritual creatures. And because this Enochian system comes from the angels Gabriel and Raphael and Michael and Oriel, like that's who delivered the Enochian system from these archangels, and they are even in the Enochian system, emanated down in lower forms of their spiritual being, because the idea is archangels are vast, right? And can manifest in many lower forms. And so all of those angels appear under different names. Like Oriel is a form, the Enochian heptarchial king of kings, Karmara, is a form of Oriel. And Ave, I believe, is a form of Raphael. So these Enochian beings are forms of, or aspects of the archangels themselves. A lot of them are. Not all of them, just the major ones.
Okay, well.
Yeah, a little bit of Enochian study can do more harm than good. There's a lot to be gleaned when you go to the diaries themselves and really look at the stuff that was not published in a lot of secondary literature, giving us a very myopic view of Enochian magic for a very long time. I mean, those Enochian studies are really only getting, building steam right now with the easy access finally to all the source material that's been unknown and not very easy to get at.
Yeah, and this kind of the issue with regulating, making sure that you keep the freedom of belief and freedom of expression. It is an issue, and I'm not sure how to navigate it. But yeah, I mean, I think there is room to stop people from blatantly taking advantage of these vulnerable people. I think there is room to do that, and to enforce the disclaimers and to raise awareness as well in the public mind of stuff like third-party readings. Like, one of the most common tarot questions literally any reader gets, no matter what their style of reading, is what's this person's feelings for me? And I don't like that kind of question. It's an invasion of privacy, and it's not really helping the person who's asking to answer that question. So I focus the readings on what people can do, what's within their control, within your sphere of control, and if nothing's within your control, then how can you use one of the tarot archetypes to gain acceptance or peace or whatever other quality. And that's how I would focus it, rather than on predictions or stuff like that. Although it's not an absolute thing. So if someone is, if someone's in a relationship and they want to improve the relationship, then you can definitely, give insights into the other person, because it kind of bounces off. The information kind of ricochets, so that you kind of have to look at the other person to get a full understanding of what's going on. And I don't consider that an ethical issue. But in terms of just satisfying people's ego, a lot of people come to tarot expecting their ego to be satisfied, really, and I don't consider that to be a good thing.
Oh yeah, I remember one reading I had when I was 12. Um, I did it in a restaurant in the mall, and it was a pretty rough reading. It was showing that the person would need some major growth, but was very stagnant. Like, had a little death reverse there, like just in where things were going was just more stagnation. And the guy eventually just said, "Hey, look, I can you just tell me everything's going to be good? I'm going to get a lot of money and be happy." I was like, "What?" And he was like, "Yeah, just tell me that." I'm like, everything's going to be good and you're going to get a lot of money and be happy. He was like, "All right, thanks." And he gave me my $60. And I was like, Jesus, oh well. What are you gonna do? Right? This is a lot of what we're talking about when we talk about this is the legal issues, and in some ways it seems maybe the limitations of the fact that we have no actual laws really encompassing what we're doing, and so we have to guise it under entertainment. That's the problem. The problem is entertainment's not accurate umbrella to cover what we're doing, right? We're still getting wet, no matter how we position it, if we're going to actually do our job. Because if there's an answer there that you should give someone, you should probably give it to them, and they need to use their own discernment about how seriously to take it and how to apply it in their own life. There's got to be equal responsibility, I think, between the reader and the questioner. Like equal spiritual responsibility for the process and the dialogue that's occurring under God.
Yeah, and I think there are times to tell people about fate, sometimes, occasionally, but for the most part, it's about what's within your control. And but there are fated things, especially if people are doing certain spiritual practices. It's going to lead to certain things unfolding. So you can predict the future, definitely, but I just don't think it's usually wise to put the focus onto the future. And when I used to give predictions, I started noticing that people who were easy to read, very receptive to it, you can kind of you can basically like take over their kind of lower self or their ego. And if you're an unscrupulous person, you can convince them that something's going to happen, and then basically hypnotize them into making it happen, and then they give you the credit, right? For the so that was another thing. I always try to encourage people to be open to let me read their energy, but I want them to also really, really, maybe 2 days after I've said it or a week after I've said it, consider what I said and then decide for themselves so that they take back the polarity, so that they take back the control. Otherwise, I'm just hypnotizing someone into doing something, basically, because hypnosis is very related. You're basically putting someone into a trance to read their energy, and if someone is not in at least some kind of light kind of trance, you're not going to be able to really pick up on much.
No, not my experience, but I can see why you might say that. Yeah, if people are closed down, and they can create barriers and blocks that are hard to read through. But I don't think you have to put people in a trance to read their energy. I think you just have to.
I'm saying if you want to read their energy specifically, if you want to tap into the astral light, you're not tapping into their energy. It's just the astral light. But I tend to read people's auras specifically, or those people's specific energy, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no.
But yeah, sense. You can still get information about people from the astral light. The problem is I try to set criteria to the information so that you're getting a more accurate picture, basically using logic to try and get an objective picture rather than the just the emotions or the thoughts that are occurring. Like let's say you let's say you're doing your spread. You can have a spread where you have positions in the spread which are a solution, or you can just have a spread which is focused on the different kind of solutions and goes more detail into solutions. And I think if you get someone to, when you're reading for others, it's useful if people open up to you to a certain extent, because then you already have the kind of first part of the spread done without having to pull those cards. You can just focus on solutions and focus on solving the issue if you get a good understanding of the issue.
Yeah, for sure. It's an interesting balance, of course, and this is something I've talked a lot with friends who focus more on psychic reading than tarot and stuff like that. And having grown up with so much of all of those different things around me, of pure psychism, practice like psychometry, or just taking someone's hand and reading their energy, or we focusing on clairvoyance and clairsentience and reading their aura on a very immediate level, like we were saying, versus dipping into the Akashic, say, to pick up what's going on there as a kind of intermediary. It's a balancing act. And when I was younger, I would get frustrated with tarot cards sometimes because it just wasn't as direct as I want it to be. So I would take my classmate's hand and just read their energy and just stream the images, and they would be shocked at how many things I was describing that they that I couldn't have known that they were thinking about or wanting to know answers to, right? And then, of course, I went through my phase of focusing more on what I was seeing in the aura and sensing in their immediate energy and the different layers. That would eventually became something I did more if I was just focusing on doing healing or laying on hands afterwards. But eventually, after 5, 6 especially, I would focus on an intermediary angel while doing a reading. And that's what I still do today primarily, is I read the cards themselves and take the cards very seriously. And rather than touch the person, I'll touch the card. And then as far as my own intuitive or psychical connection goes, I'll draw more from the intermediary and governing angel of the reading than I will try and break it into the person's sphere of sensation and pick up from them directly. There's always a problem with other people's energy. If you don't purify it, someone else's energy is always poisonous to you in a way. So you got to purify that. Otherwise, you could be walking away with some issues you didn't have before doing the reading for someone. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
notice that?
Yeah, I used to find that when
A
I
lot of
was first
pitfalls
starting.
they don't warn you about on TikTok.
Yeah, so yeah.
So what were
But
you saying?
yeah, I used to have that issue, but what I do is I let the cards kind of show me that energy. They're showing me a kind of reflection of the energy. So you're observing the energy. So you're not actually kind of going into it. You're not contaminating yourself in it. You're observing it. And the same thing with the astral. You don't want synchronicity coming into your life. You know, what a lot of people would describe as taking on karma. You know, like if you're healing someone, you have the possibility of basically taking on their karma, right? If you're doing hands-on healing or whatever, if you do it in a certain way, because you're contaminating yourself in that energy. But if you're just observing it, or if you're using if you're basically staying outside of the sea of energy, you're not contaminating yourself, so you don't have to worry about karma or bad synchronicity in that case. So it's about observing it. And the way I would suggest you do that, although it's probably only one way, is by attempting to rise to the spiritual, because that's above the astral, and then you would have control over it, and control over what happens with your willpower and the way you direct your attention. But the issue with a lot of tarot readers, they go straight into the energy, and it's like diving into an ocean, and then they don't purify themselves, or they get lost in the ocean of the energy, and you get that issue of picking up psychic dirt and experiences and everything.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. So, okay, where were we before I had to? What? We've opened up a few interesting little channels in this conversation that I like. Before we move on, I don't believe in karma, but I have noticed, tell me if this makes sense to you. I have noticed that what a lot of people call karma is not what I would call karma. It's one of those words, sort of like gnosis or Gnostic, which is even more, gnosis is not that problematic, but Gnostic is a problematic word. Definitionally, it's a bit broad. It's a bit broader than people would, than we'd like. It would be nice if it really just referred to basically one idea, one set of ideas in one group historically, but it doesn't, right? Karma is another tricky word. So when you talk about taking on someone's karma, right? Like if I hear take on someone's energy, I can buy that. Maybe taking on aspects of some sort of imprinted kind of destiny or egregoric karmic pattern or even pathos that might be sort of spiritually transferable. It's like when you hang out with your buddies and each of them has their quirks, but if you hang out with just one of them for a long time, you start to take on some of their quirks. We've all noticed this, right? Whether it's just a simple expression or pattern of speech or entire modality. Sometimes when you really spend a lot of time with just one person, I mean, this happens in romantic relationships too. People become more similar to each other, hopefully. I think it's probably a bad thing if when couples grow apart, right? That's not good. It's better to grow together. But so what's going on when you say karma and talking about taking someone's karma, maybe?
Yeah, well, I don't believe in karma either, but
Yeah.
but the understanding of karma that a lot of people have is like what you put out comes back to you, and kind of a retributive retribution. And the idea that if you're ill, because we were talking about taking on karma from healing, right? If you
Oh
have a
yeah.
certain physical illness, it might
Josephine.
be then it
Sorry.
might be from like misdeeds in a past life, right? And that's now being expressed as a physical illness.
Yeah,
Um,
Josephine McCarthy loves that, right? Like she loves that one where she's like she curses and like uses a lot of profanity in her books at times, which it's sort of refreshing. It's especially around the spiritual trend to say that people who are ill or have chronic illnesses or who get sick are are failing spiritually. It's a sign that they're not focusing on wellness mentally enough, or they're not, that there's something wrong with their soul because of their physical ailments. And she's just like, that's bullshit. People get sick. It's part of life. What the fuck is your fucking problem, you stupid fucks? Like, that's literally a quote from her book.
yeah,
Not true, but you get the idea. But it's nice to have. That is refreshing. I can see why people do praise her so much, because it is, that whole thing where spiritual communities exile someone because they get ill, and therefore that's proof that they'd rather it be proof that something's wrong with you than evidence that the law of attraction might be bullshit.
sure. And yeah, I mean, I think if you're I think it's tricky, but I think if you're going to assume reincarnation and kind of cause and effect in a way that goes beyond ways we can understand, then you could potentially make the argument without it actually being a victim blame that someone has become ill because of past life actions. I don't think you
Yeah,
can
that's
totally dismiss that as victim blaming.
I mean, the original Hindu caste system origin of karma is probably the most toxic version of it, right? Like, the reason you're a poor, homeless bum with no food is because you did something wrong in your past life. And the key to maybe getting to move up the caste system in the next life is to just placidly accept your low station in life. And if you do good with that, get rewarded in the next life. And maybe one day you'll be a Brahmin like me. Like that. It's so, like, to not look, I don't know how anyone can look at that these days and not just see like the political machinations all over it, right? Like, it so obviously was instituted to keep poor people down and homeless and have them just be content with the misery of their life.
Right. It's a very unappealing idea. But if you think about it in terms of kind of evolution, and it takes thousands of lifetimes to to reach enlightenment, and you have to learn material lessons. It kind of it allows you to see it in a perspective that suddenly it's not necessarily political machinations, although you may not agree with the idea. You can see how it could be a legitimate point of view, at least.
Could it be a legitimate political point of view? Huh.
Not political point of view, but kind of spiritual explanation of, because if you consider that I don't know. I don't even want to do the devil's advocate because I don't necessarily agree with the idea, right? But I can, if you were to give me enough time to write down the devil's advocate, I could make a strong devil's advocate case for why it is actually a legitimate idea and why it would actually be fair ultimately, because we're looking at it from the physical perspective of, it's this lifetime, this is what is happening to you this lifetime. But if you hold the physical perspective and then look at the spiritual perspective, you can see it from a different angle. And this is another thing that kind of New Agers get wrong where they confuse the.
Sorry about that.
Okay, so
I know you were on a roll.
Yeah, this is another thing that New Agers get wrong, where there are a lot of neo-Vedantic teachers claiming to be spiritually enlightened, and it was called out by the I think it's Adva Vedanta teachers, or the kind of Indian teachers of it, right? The actual Vedic teachers who are saying you have to differentiate between the ultimate reality, and they have 3 levels for it, but I'll just use 2 levels. You have the physical perspective, and then you have the spiritual perspective. And when you look at pain from the spiritual perspective, you don't have to discount the physical perspective. You can say, yes, it's really bad that people are sick and so on, but the spiritual perspective is ultimately over thousands of lifetimes, whatever argument they want to make, and it's from a spiritual perspective. It's not discounting the genuine pain, and it's definitely misplaced to then let go of compassion and everything else when you are when you're seeing the suffering in the physical. But in terms of spiritual progress, it could be argued, and it's a disagreeable argument, but it could be argued from that kind of philosophy that it does actually suggest something about your ultimate progress in the thousands of incarnations.
Do you believe in reincarnation?
Yeah.
How do you think it works?
I don't know, but I believe in it basically because I feel like I was a woman in a past life, and I definitely feel like I had a past life, and there's certain kind of issues related to motherhood and having children and basically family Cancerian stuff. And I feel like I'm out of place in a male body, but I also feel like I have a kind of duty to stay in a male body. But yeah, but yeah, that I don't know how reincarnation works, but I do believe in it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's an interesting problem, right? Because if it was true, it would mean all the religions and spiritualities that believe in the transmigration of the soul, I guess, to heaven or spiritual realms, or like Christians in the original church believed in the resurrection, not in the immortality of the spirit, but in the resurrection of the physical body. Um, Christians only adapted the immortality of the spirit through Greek Hellenism, and that was not how it was originally. Um, and so if reincarnation, if we leapfrog through time and lives, then that would mean they're all wrong, right? And they might be wrong. I'm more of the opinion that reincarnation is wrong, but I could be wrong, you know? Um, and because there's other explanations for past life memories and stuff like that, I would be inclined to think it's more the result of inability for us to understand the way, the psychic worldview, or the naturalist worldview of spirits and sort of dimensionality of worlds. You know what I mean? Like, if there's memories, if there's a spirit out there from a certain time, we could get their spirits, or like the Holocaust survivors reincarnated today with memories of the Holocaust, studied by the Hasidic rabbi Yonasan Gershom Sholem, Yonasan Gershom, not Gershom Scholem. I confused those names. Yonasan Gershom spent his life studying Holocaust, reincarnated souls from the Holocaust. He's a Californian, but he was teaching me Kabbalah in '96 in Vienna. And I always thought that was really fascinating thing to study, right? But then eventually when I started to question reincarnation, I was like, well, then how would these people have memories of the Holocaust? And I started to then look into ideas that I had not believed held any water, like panpsychism and ideas of spirits actually just feeding ideas to human souls. Especially, you could imagine that if a surviving ghost or spirit or some sort of psychic memory or imprint from a Holocaust victim was floating out there and was like troubled and wanted to convey its the horrors of its memory on something, it would probably be to a younger person or someone open enough psychically to absorb that as a memory, as what would seem like a memory. That's an explanation I discovered. I was like, yeah, and I tend more towards that paradigm these days than the leapfrog through time one of souls. But again, of course I could be wrong. We don't have the answers yet, which is what makes this all so fascinating.
Yeah, and yeah, with the recovery of past life memories, you have to get into a receptive state, even if you
That I always found super sketchy.
Right, even if you go to like Turkey and you're at a certain monument or you're at a certain place in Turkey that you felt like you were drawn to, and that could be an astral thing. It could be something from the astral light, and you have to be receptive. So it certainly it's an issue with past lives, because even if you verify it historically, you haven't verified the occult side of it. You've just verified it in terms of like actual events. So
right, that's a big example that gets brought up a lot, and I'd love to ask. There's a few people I'd like to talk to about it. Nick Farrell's one of them. He used to have, similar to me, certain he's changed his beliefs over time in similar way to me, so that would be interesting to talk about. He talks about the famous examples of victims of murder, of course, and other crimes, who then have memories as young children, and then they're like, this is where I was killed. They go find a body there. You got to admit that's some of the strongest evidence we have for something spooky going on, right?
Mm.
But it could be explained by things other than reincarnation. None of those things are any more beloved by science, by hard science, right? Science doesn't like any of these things. um, but they do require answers, in my opinion. Like, how would a young kid have memories of some brutal crime that had been committed 5 years earlier before they were born, and then they go find an actual body based on those? There's a few of these accounts out there, I believe, and there's probably a bunch more that just were never investigated to completion, right? What's your take?
Yeah, I think you would have to at least posit some kind of way of understanding the 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 astral realm and the spiritual realms, in such a way that reincarnation was the only reasonable explanation for these memories occurring. You would have to somehow classify the nature of the astral in such a way that in this particular case it can't be a thought form, because thought forms work like this or that, and you can then discount it logically, right? You'd have to do that, but otherwise, yeah, there's other explanations, and you simply have no idea. There's no way to verify.
Do you have any guesses, educated guesses, intuitive guesses on which of the sciences might be the first to start to really hammer in a nail in any of these areas? Like, get that first bit tapped into the wood, because it feels like right now that there isn't much headway in the hard sciences that could, and in my opinion will eventually acknowledge the aspects of this stuff that are real. Just like, we used to not know about invisible forces at all, and then we figured out magnetism. That was a simple one, right? But for a long time we didn't know what magnetism was. We just thought it was another magical thing. Do you think it will be like neurocognitive sciences, or physics, or biology, or what do you think might make the first breakthrough? Because you seem to read from a lot of different sources. That's what I really like that about you. You seem to, yeah, not mind looking at a wide range of things. That's a good quality to have.
Yeah, I always try to look at both sides, and I find that a lot of the like Christian apologetics is actually really good for getting occult knowledge about the astral, like how those apologists have done investigations into mediumship and basically and showed how it's deceptive, and talking about passive mediumship where you get into a trance and stuff. I'm quite against mediumship, because of how passive it is. You've heard me talk about, controlling the experience and willpower. So I don't think being passive is a good idea when you're tapping into things which you can't see, right? But what was the question?
Yeah, I was just curious if you had any guesses on which science might make the first headway into any of these things when eventually it does occur. We probably don't have a name for some of the stuff that will exist in the future, or fields of study that will exist, but we're moving forward, like learning a lot pretty quickly still.
Oh yeah, so which science? Physics, really.
It's got to be physics, hey? Yeah.
Yeah.
That's my suspicion too, because everything like, neuroscience and all these things, they're locked so strongly in their frameworks. You see this even in the arts, like people in literature or religious studies or philosophy or psychology, when they try and do, for example, what I did, which was theology, they usually fall apart because they're not actually familiar with the technical language or the extent of study done in areas which in their fields looks quite small relatively. Like when a philosophy professor, for example, looks at mysticism, they see very little. because they're not aware of the body of work that's been done in the, when you dive into the technical depths of mystical theology, for example, which is, there's been just as much research and writing done in that field as in most fields, except if you're not in that field, you just don't realize it. Just like, you know, a neuroscientist probably is unaware of a lot of the stuff going on in physics and vice versa, right? So all of these, we've compartmentalized our fields of study and disciplines to the extent that we're actually often doing more harm than good these days. And that's been being slowly realized. Like, you know, even when I was starting university 22 years ago, 23 years ago, there was a, you know, there's big push for interdisciplinary and cross-disciplinary study. And I think that's increasing. Hopefully it's increasing. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'm definitely gonna be trying to be a polymath, but I am the
Start
only
on mastering
person.
one thing first, eh?
I'm the only person in my generation, you know, who I've seen who is deliberately attempting through meta learning strategy and so on to actually, you know, become a polymath. It's very rare. It's very rare. I don't think there's going to be many polymaths in my generation. I think there might be people, you know, I know a couple of geniuses. I've met a couple of actual geniuses who I've been friends with, and you know, they might end up, you know, kind of the head of organizations and having, you know, they can kind of bring together experts from different fields, right? And they won't have direct expertise in those fields, but they'll be able to oversee it, kind of like how Bill Gates, he's not a qualified medical professional, but he's the head of the WHO and he can run it. He is capable of running it, despite how people use that as an argument against him, because he has the management skills, right? So he's able to run it because he's getting the advice from the professionals, and then he's making the decisions based on the advice from multiple professionals. As long as he's literate in the terminology, I think he's qualified to be in that managerial position. I don't think you have to put a medical professional in that position. And I think the same thing with the geniuses of my generation. It's really going to be, you're running some kind of organization, you're taking people from multiple fields which are somewhat interconnected, and that's how you would do it. I don't think you would really have basically anyone who has the actual expertise to a very high level in both philosophy and mathematics, or both, whatever it is that's slightly connected.
Well, you've just started at a university program in psychology, correctly? Correct?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I definitely wish you well on that journey. I think the longer you spend getting to know people in the university world, you'll be surprised how many polymaths you do meet. And certainly genius doesn't equate to being applying it. You know, just because you're genius level, which is an IQ thing, doesn't mean you apply it. There's nothing more common, as they say, than you know, a genius homeless person. I mean, it's probably not literally true, but you know, one thing does not necessitate always another. And just like Bill Gates might be qualified to have the managerial skill to manage doctors, doesn't mean he should be managing doctors. I mean, there should be ethical questions like, is this person a good person, or do they use this information to, you know, I don't know, kill people, which in my opinion is what he primarily uses it for. I think he's a deeply, deeply evil and misanthropic human being. So is he capable of doing what he's doing? Clearly. Should he be? Probably not, but that's just my opinion. And it doesn't really, we don't need to get into Bill Gates.
Yeah, and you know, parallel testing. There's a thing coming out with health, at least in Europe, it's coming out. It'll probably be in America as well, because it's a Bill Gates initiative, where they're going to be bringing out I think it's mainly vaccines, but it might be other drugs as well, in 100 days, and they're going to do parallel testing on the clinical trials. And there's an issue there in terms of scientific rigor, because you're assuming that because you've tested a specific part once, that this part in combination with all the other parts, no matter which combination you put it in, is going to have the same effect. You're not controlling for how you arrange the pieces, basically. And you're supposed to control for that in science, as far as I understand. So I don't know how he managed to get that through, but
I like how perspectival you are, brother. I appreciate the fact that yes, it's a really good thing to see that you're willing to let your mind do what it does. Yeah, how the hell did he? Like I said, I don't think we need to talk about that guy anymore. He's people can do their own research on Bill Gates, but yeah, I just, after what we've been through the last couple of years, it's just, I don't know. Yeah, sorry, it's a dumbfounding time to live in. But one of the nice things is we can be occultists and not get persecuted, so that's fun. I'm enjoying that. You're probably enjoying that too, eh?
yeah, my generation definitely enjoying it.
You guys are lucking out off all our hard work to get to do the serious scholarship and research and develop more university accreditation, like a lot of us occultists have done. And to the extent that now you can be in university and mention tarot instead of the teacher laughing at you like they did in my day, they'd be like, oh, there's a conference on Renaissance, blah, blah, blah coming up. You could do a paper on that and submit it. They didn't say that back in 2000. It was a different time. I remember even in grad school asking about angels, like probably got me on a list or something as like, a student to be worried about if they had sufficient capacity for reason.
You mentioned Georgina, that darling,
Yeah,
earlier.
she's under fire now, and I don't agree with really the dogpiling on her or the guilt by association arguments that I've seen made, but I think they're missing the more substantive points, which is like stealing other occultists' work and targeting other people and sending your mob after them. It's just not cool. Stealing others' work, or if you have tons of followers, sending them out to bully people to suicide. That's not cool.
I don't know that much about her, but I've seen her YouTube stuff. I don't use any social media.
Yeah,
so.
she's an influencer, right? She's a big influencer. And so, we should judge influencers on how they use their influence, because they're not influencers because they're educated or smart or good with have it, because they have a solid knowledge base or anything. That's not what makes the qualification. What makes you an influencer is having influence over a large quantity of people. That's your only qualification. So we should judge those people on how they use that influence. Is it nefarious to rob and abuse other people, or is it to uphold others in the community and encourage dialogue and learning rather than theft and cancellation?
Well, I've listened to some of her podcasts. I find a lot of her opinions are politically charged and a product of her generation rather than rather than a kind of product of the culture that she lives in and her generation, and you know, which part of the United States she lives in, and all of that kind. It's a product of her environment rather than a product of not necessarily a product of her own critical faculties and considerations on the topics that she's talking about. And that's probably because the podcast is quite casual, and she's basically having a casual conversation with some of her, you know, occultist friends, and that kind of probably sets the tone for it, rather than a more considered, open-ended philosophical exploration of the issue. It's more like basically trying to mentor the teenage generation, or the early 20s, who are new to occultism and who need guidance away from fantasy, or the realm of utter fantasy, into something that is, you know, at least somewhat, at least something that you can do without ruining your life, kind of thing. So I guess that's probably what it is. I would assume.
Yeah, well, you know, people can go see all the dumpster fire on Twitter anytime if they want, but yeah, what I took issue with, what the red flag was to me, despite, you know, hearing the mistreatment of other people, was like, yeah, so she was scheduled to come on my podcast, canceled the minute it was meant to start, messaged me, said let's reschedule, and it was one of those, yeah, fake reschedules, right? And I was like, okay, whatever, that happens, too bad. I was excited to learn about what it's like from her to come into Thelema and practice, be a young Thelemic practitioner in a, like, outside of OTO and the training systems that exist, AA, OTO, that sort of stuff, like independently come at it and stay on your own. That to me, I thought would have been an interesting conversation. And I assumed she would be interested to be able to actually ask, like, you know, questions about, you know, some of the shared ritual tradition between OTO and AA and the GD, because obviously they're intimately linked, though radically different in their manifestations and applications, which is often misunderstood, and therefore a very interesting area to discuss between practitioners of those variations, right? And so I thought it would have been a great interview. She then went off though and did my buddy's podcast, which is good, because, you know, he got to deal with her. The thing that rubbed me the wrong way is, after canceling on me the very last minute, she then put out a podcast on the Golden Dawn, which is something I'm a scholar of, and in it just made shit up. It's like, oh, I don't actually have any real knowledge about this, so I'm just gonna guess and talk like I'm an expert. So that's what irked me, because it's like, can you imagine if I like canceled on Dr. Steven Skinner, having him on my podcast on the very last minute, and then recorded an episode where I just talked about grimoires and made shit up, like used like very select knowledge that I had and filled in the blanks with extrapolations and guesswork, but presented it like an authority? He'd probably be like, bloody hell, why would he do this? Right? He's not English, but he's Australian. But what, you sound sort of English. He's just old. God bless you, Steven Skinner. He is coming on the podcast soon. I keep forgetting to. I keep not emailing him back. I gotta fucking fix that. Anyway, yeah, it's douchey, right? It's douchey. It makes you look like a total chump and a loser. And yeah, I lost all respect for her after doing that sort of thing. It's like, what do you want? How are you going to expect people to take you as an expert if you bamboozle them in that way? It's not going to hold up. And who might think it might hold up? Maybe a 21-year-old or a 20-year-old, maybe, but not a smart 20-year-old or smart 21-year-old. I was a young teacher. The Golden Dawn had me start teaching people when I was 17, right? But it wasn't because I was an influencer and was popular. It was because I was competent and capable, and that was attested to by the hundreds of people ahead of me in the order who had observed me and witnessed my education and growth for the 2 years prior to that. Right? It was a community of people that comes together and says, yeah, you're teaching now. We want to learn from you. And that's a very different kind of thing than this new kind of teacher slash influencer community that we see rising up, which can have its strengths, but boy, can it also have its weaknesses. And I think a lot of the smarter people of that generation, as you were saying, the reason we're not hearing from them at all is because, like you, they're probably doing what most smart people do, which is going and getting some fucking degrees or educations in, whether it's in mainstream universities or alternative schools, however they're doing it with mentors like you are. They're the people of that, her age, that are probably the ones we want to hear from, are busy getting their education done and learning and growing. Like, that's the way to do it. And then we'll hear from them in like 5-10 years when they start actually writing books that actually mean something, and bringing their youthful perspectives to light in dialogue with the historical knowledge we've already accumulated. This whole new movement, so many people just message me all the time saying, or critique my approach to things, saying we don't need books anymore. The knowledge of the past is useless, completely useless. It's like, no wonder that there's such a totalitarian and authoritarian generation, because they literally don't know what's happened previously in history, which is a great way to just run in circles while you attempt to rewrite Plato because you can't be bothered to read him. Though I'd recommend Aristotle more.
Yeah, and one of the reasons why I don't have many of my videos up is because I'm learning all the time, and I might make a video and I had a lot of information which isn't usually available, so I had good information, but then I learned something new and I realized, well, there's a mistake in that video, and then 3 months later maybe there's 3 mistakes in the video.
Okay.
and suddenly, 2 years later, you made this video and you look back at it and you're laughing at yourself, because even though you did decent research, it wasn't the best research, and you're a way better researcher now, and you know more about scholarly, how to spot rhetoric and scholarly research and archives and online, like archives and libraries, and you know a lot better how to do it. So you delete the video because it was basically misinformation, but it wasn't deliberate. It was just, and it's a humility thing. It's like, I was wrong and I don't want to mislead any more people. And so if you're an influencer and you're trying to rack up your views and you're making extrapolations and inserting your political opinions into things, and you're a product of your times and your generation rather than a product of what works philosophically and what the actual information that we have now is, then it's guaranteed that you're going to be putting out false information, and a lot of it over time. And I think really you would have to have some procedure in place to correct that. And that's one of the issues I'm working out right now with what I want to do. I want to make high quality content with tarot, but let's say I make a video on the history of the tarot. I would have to do, like, I'm a fast researcher, but I would have to do probably a few years of research, even as a fast researcher, even if I was to work on it basically for most of my time, for most of the time that I have, in order to find out the history of the tarot, and that would be one video. And
Yeah, I mean, it's why scholars break things into very small, very specific pieces, right?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a scholar. I don't know. I'm learning how to
Yeah.
write scientifically now, and yeah, I'm learning a lot about academia now, because
Yeah, well, you're in the practice of scholarship. The fact that you put out a bunch of videos, then took them down because you found too many mistakes in them, that's some hardcore self scholarship there. So don't sell yourself short. That's like, most people wouldn't do that. They would just put out additional videos that correct things that they've learned since then, and thus build their catalog online or whatever. Um, the fact that you're willing to be so self-critical as to remove stuff, that is the practice of good scholarship at play. So keep going with it, man. And then don't, we all got to go through cocoon phases where we, you know re-educate ourselves in certain areas and improve our knowledge and stuff. I mean, because things change all the time. Like the third edition of this book just came out, Magic in the Middle Ages, and it's got huge updates from the previous editions because so much has been learned in the last 30 years that the field almost doesn't look anything like it did when I started in it. um, and you got to update your knowledge. You got to keep learning and correct yourself.
yeah. So
Sounds like you're
um,
doing well.
yeah, I'm trying to work out how to basically mentor people in tarot, in a non-dogmatic way that also, like I say, gets them out of um, believing that everything that happens in terms of synchronicity is from some divine source, because it's a big issue in the community. So I'm brushing up on my mentorship skills, because I did mentorship a few years ago, but that was in basically esports, so that I wasn't quite a pro gamer. I was doing like small time competitions, nothing major, but at a competitive level, right, where you're winning money. And I was teaching people in that, but that is, people they have to already be at a certain skill level for you to be teaching someone about that, right? They already have to be a competitive gamer somewhat, right? They don't have to be part of FaZe Clan, but right, but they have to be at least somewhat competent. But when you're teaching people tarot, it's a niche thing, but most people are completely new to it. So you have to find a way to kind of explain things in a simple way, explain things in a coherent way, and not assume that people know everything that you're talking about, and really have to break it down to a beginner level. Because I've had teachers, my computer science teacher, she is she was very good engineer and computer scientist, but you ask her to explain something, she comes over to the computer, takes the keyboard away from you, and then and then types in the code that you need to have to answer the question or to solve the problem, and then doesn't bother explaining. You know what I mean? And then she wonders why she doesn't get many passes in her class. It's like, because you're not actually a teacher, you're an engineer who should have gone into the actual engineering, not the teaching side of it, because you don't know how to teach.
Yeah, pedagogy is a real thing, eh?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, it is. I my famous example is always languages. I'm still not naturally gifted with languages, but I'm capable in seven because I love them and I work my butt off on them. But I got a lot of friends who put in a fraction of the effort I put in and just get miles ahead of me. It's crazy. But I do love them. Therefore I keep at it, and I keep improving bit by bit different languages. And I never really learned French. 10 years of being force fed French in Canadian school from grade 1 to grade 10. And then they let me test out, so I didn't have to do it anymore. So I did pass still grade 10 French, but it was bullshit. And I barely learned any of it. And the teachers were just people that spoke French, whether they were from Quebec or from France. They just spoke French. They had no, I found out later that none of them had any education in teaching whatsoever. And it felt like that in class, though, of course, as a kid, you don't know what you don't know. So you're just like, I guess I'm stupid because it's not sticking. And the teacher makes me feel like garbage in class every day. It's just like, I would dread them. I would dread French class. But then in grad school, you had two options for learning biblical Hebrew, ancient Hebrew. You could do classes every week for 2 years and pass the master's level test, right? For your master's. Or you could do a 1 month intensive, like 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. in class every day, reading till 1 a.m. and then reading all and studying all weekend for 30 days. And you would take the same test as the people who studied it for 3 hours a week for 2 years. And the people who did the 2 years and 3 hours a week, some of them would actually fail that test. The people who did the 30-day intensive, rarely was there any failures in that test, from that test, even though it was the same test. And of course, since, if you're using it actively after that, it just gets better and better. And so when I learned Hebrew in 30 days, I was like, oh, I'm not incompetent at languages. I just literally never had a French teacher that knew anything about teaching whatsoever. They were just, here's a conjugation chart. Let's just go over it. How's that applied to the structure of syntax? They don't know how to transfer that over. When I started actually reading grammar books, like for the Irish language and other languages, I was like, oh, there's like an actual way that languages are taught so that we learn them well. And then there's the way that our French teachers tried to teach them to us, which was more like just like fucking abuse with an accent. So
Yeah,
teaching skills matters a lot. And I hope that's something that we don't forget as a society, that's really popular to renounce all university education these days, which I think is a big mistake. I'm not sure who's going to make toasters and stuff like that, because as the famous example goes, one person can't make a toaster. If you just go out into nature, you're shit out of luck. You're not going to be able to make one, right? You don't even have the skills to create one component part, probably. But someone out there does, and I'm pretty sure that most of them learn that shit in universities or specialized trade schools. So hopefully we don't completely throw the baby out with the bathwater when it comes to education over the next 50 years.
yeah. And yeah,
I think psychology is a great place to start. I know it's easy to shit on it, and a lot of people do, but I focused a lot on psychoanalytic philosophy, which is highly integrated with psychology, of course, though I don't really know psychology that well. But psychology touches on so many different things. It's very easy to I think, transition into other specialties and achieve your goal of being a polymath, dude, if that's what you want to be. Titles matter so much to your generation, eh? Why do you think that is? You've noticed this, right? I'm not talking out of my ass here.
yeah, titles. Well,
What do you think's up with the younger generation's obsession with titles? Do you think something's going on there?
well, I think it's probably this is probably a common trope, but it's probably something like trying to find meaning when people are no longer religious, is what I would guess immediately, because a lot of people are very atheistic these days, and even if they get into occultism, they may still be very atheistic, and even if they're spiritual, they're often spiritual in opposition to religious conduct, at least my generation. unless they're like going back to the Latin Catholic masses, but and becoming like very traditional. But I would say, I don't really know, but I'm guessing, but I think it's probably something like trying to find an identity. Because I don't know, let's say you think of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. We're at the point in Western society now where my generation's growing up with all of their needs satisfied. What they're trying to do is basically put the cap onto the pyramid of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and that is basically the self-actualization part. And that's probably why the self-development is so ingrained in popular culture, I would say, because all of your needs are met. So it's like now you can go off and claim the law of attraction as a thing, and try and climb the corporate hierarchy, or not even climb the corporate hierarchy, but climb the YouTube hierarchy or the social media or online business hierarchy, or and you can live in this world where you are there are professionals in older generations working in the background, propping up this very very delicate system which needs people to run it. But if you're in a certain section of the population, you're completely oblivious to everything that goes on in the background to keep society running. So it can be kind of easy to forget how things are run, and that, so you end up in this kind of position of just exploring what your identity is, and assuming that individuality overtakes everything, really. I think it's a narcissism.
Well, fingers crossed that we can improve things with our efforts and be leaders to each other, right? None of us are perfect, and hopefully we can be humble enough to help each other improve without destroying society in the process. Seems like we're more trying to destroy our societies, but I have hope. Maybe not short-term hope, but long-term hope. Do you have much advice, good advice for new tarot practitioners or experienced tarot practitioners in your estimation?
Get a spiritual teacher. Seriously, get a spiritual teacher before you start reading tarot. Get a spiritual teacher who who teaches you philosophy, critical thinking, and rationality, and logic and deduction, because a large part of what I'm including in the tarot mentorship that I'm developing is critical thinking and logic, because it plays a big part in learning to read tarot. But get a spiritual teacher, because spirituality, when it's taught by a teacher, involves critical thinking and all that kind of stuff. It involves study. A lot of the time, not every tradition, but a lot of the traditions, especially like a lot of the Western traditions, like but Vedic philosophy, I believe, and Neoplatonism and Hermeticism is very study oriented, and so really get a spiritual teacher, and once you have a spiritual paradigm, you will not go far wrong with the tarot, and you'll be able to avoid the superstitions and the traps and the allurement of the, you know, the fantasies in the astral realm, which you which have been kind of vomited all over YouTube. you know, for, you know, just type in tarot reading into YouTube, and you see this vomiting of people who don't understand anything about the astral realm, and it's you know, a little bit of critical thinking, and it would, if people had the understanding that spirituality does not abandon critical thinking, you know, critical thinking has you know, a certain, there's different types of critical thinking. I'm not talking about the critical thinking of Rational Wiki or the gatekeepers of Wikipedia, where they dismiss parapsychological research or anything, you know, paranormal, and claim that they're using critical thinking in order to show that it doesn't exist. Right? I'm talking about critical thinking, which makes allowance for things that we don't understand, or spiritual realities or whatever, but it makes allowance for other forms of knowledge, right? Forms of knowledge other than empirical evidence that is hard scientific proof. So you can make allowance for other forms of knowledge and have critical thinking, and I think that's the main thing. That will basically, you know, that will basically shield you from most of the nonsense, because then you have discernment. Basically, it's basically the cultivation of discernment, which is, you know, I believe that if you were to go to a mystery school in ancient times, that it would be like 3 to 10 years of learning, like critical thinking and how to think and philosophizing and all of this, so that you would know how to interpret the teachings later on, and that kind of thing. You know, because when you make a mistake, they can point out the flaw in your logic, and then they can say, now apply this to everything else that you hear, because it's a flaw in the logic. So you just apply it to all the other things. And so it allows you to kind of walk the straight and narrow, regardless of the tradition or the philosophy that you end up in. So it's a universal way of ensuring that you avoid a lot of the common pitfalls. Although it's kind of a boring answer. People are probably thinking, read a tarot book or something, but you know, that's my answer. My answer is, you need to go back to school.
Well, yeah. I thought I'm impressed. I think your advice is really good, and it's different. So that's really great. I'll probably include your best advice for new and experienced tarot readers in the bonus segment for my Patreon. So for people who want, go check out my Patreon, Hermetic Podcast, patreon.com/Hermetic Podcast. There you go, and catch this advice. And thanks so much for being here and doing this with me. I'm really glad I talked to you. You're very thoughtful and careful. It seems like you think carefully as well, but aren't afraid to have your convictions, and yet you're still open to new information or opposing information, some of which I've, you know, gone at, you know, at it with you on this. And it's just, I'm really glad we talked. This was quite a surprise and delight. I think it was someone who recommended you in the comments of some video somewhere online or something, right? You sent me a screenshot of it. But yeah, of course, I'm always interested in talking with just new random people that I think not all podcasts do that sort of thing. And that's one of the things I think that is unique about mine is I just will have one, someone I have no idea what to expect, and I'm really glad that I got to get to know you a bit.
All right. Well, thank you for having me on.
Yeah, you're welcome, man. Any I know it's probably getting to your bedtime there in England. Any any questions you want to ask me before I go?
Do you have any? It's probably oversimplifying it, but do you have any resources to learn about the nature of angels, angelology and Enochian?
Yeah, I think it's really true what the so-called deep purists say, that you should start with the diaries. Now, if you want to just dive into practice, any secondary literature will give you some methodology of working. Scott Stenwick's books are an excellent way if you want to just dive into methodology. He incorporates guidance for the Christian as well as alternative prayers for the Thalemic practitioner, which is what he is. So it's always shocking that I recommend him so highly, but I do, because it's a really good way to just dive into practice. But if you want to understand the worldview of D, you got to read the scholarship, anything from Deborah Harkness's academic work on D to the other academic work on D. Egil Asprum's Arguing with Angels. It's some of his points have been recently critiqued, but there's a lot of scholarship. And if you read that in contrast with the diaries, like the big Kevin Kline version that's come out, that's a good place to start. Or Joseph Peterson's 5 Books of Mystery show you the Libri Mysteriorum, the 5 books of mystery that D had lost for years. And yeah, that's a good place for the Enochian stuff. As far as angels in themselves, I mean, everything from the Catholic Catechism to Damien Eccles' Angels and Archangels books gives their thoughts on the historical literature. But probably if you want to understand how angels interact from a magical point of view, studying the grimoires, especially now that we have them all so well annotated and debated by people like Joseph H. Peterson and Stephen Skinner and Jake Stratton Kent. I mean, Jake Stratton Kent, you want to revise your views on angels, demons, and spirits, read some of his work, either Pandemonicum or Geosophia. That's some very, he's really sort of revolutionized the nuances of our understanding in those realms. And I like the practitioners too, like, the accounts given of goetic spirits by John R. King III. I disagree with many of his views, but not necessarily with the veracity of his experiences. Ashen Chassan's Gateways Through Stone and Circle, an amazing testament of years of working with spirits through the Tritinian method and other methods. So yeah, it's unfortunately there's not a single book to read on these things. There's just not. I haven't actually read Claire Fanger's Invoking Angels, good academic work, though I did get to have lunch with her and Jocelyn Godwin years ago. I haven't read her book yet. Some of the academic ones, they really add up in price. But yeah, it's a lifelong study. I mean, I thought I knew so much when I completed my Golden Dawn education in the in the 90s and early 2000s. And then I went to grad school and did a master's in divinity at UBC and realized that I knew nothing. And every step along the way, I realized I keep knowing less and less. And that's the way it should be, less and less until I guess you're annihilated in that single point of existence that's not a point at all, but everything and nothing at the same time.
Yeah.
Shall we end it there?
Yeah.
All right. Well, really, really good to have you on the podcast, brother. And yeah, I wish you best of luck with school, and I really think you have a lot to offer the young and new readers out there with your point of view, and I hope you keep developing it and guiding those who are aware they will gain benefits from guidance. So yeah.
Right. Thank you.
What's the website you're working on that will be launched in the future? Tell people what that is, because thousands of people are going to hear this.
Tarotapprenticeship.com.
All right, and you're in development, and you should put a little email sign up placeholder. It says sites under construction. You can do that so that people can at least email, subscribe, and get notified when the site's live. I would recommend that would be my advice to you, so people can, get in, get word when the word is out.
Sure. It's technically live already. I have some articles on there.
Oh, really? When I went there, it said on just today. I don't think it was live, so maybe I went to the wrong link that you sent me. Okay. Say the link one more time for people. Tarot Apprenticeship.
Yeah, that domain, the domain I sent you, occulttarot.net. I got rid of that domain, but
Okay.
the domain tarotapprenticeship.com, yeah, it's same site, but I just changed the domain basically. So
All right. And so that's it. Tarot Apprenticeship.com.
yeah. Mm-hmm.
You heard it, folks. All right. Go check out Frater TP's work. And yeah. Thanks for coming on.